to another episode of Lift, Lighten, and Lead with Legacy Contracts. Whether this is your first time listening or you're returning for more, we're very glad you're here. This podcast is for attorneys who want more than just efficiency. You want clarity about how your firm actually operates, how decisions are made, and where strain quietly forms beneath the surface. Today's episode is the official part of our new segment called The Hidden File. This is a space where we examine the things that shape your law firm long before they come visible. The overlooked systems, the unspoken assumptions, overall the decisions that quietly determine whether a firm feels strained or stable. Our intention here isn't to add to the noise or provide quick fixes. It's to name what's been operating unseen so you lead with more calm, confidence, and clarity. Let's start opening the file. So happy New Year, everyone. It's officially almost the end of the first week of January. I hope everybody had a great New Year's, really good Christmas, and just a good start to 2026. So we are starting our new show segment titled The Hidden File, and this ties into our theme of naming the invisible for 2026 that we have here at Legacy Contracts. And pretty much what we're doing and we're diving into is all the things that go on behind the scenes, either consciously or subconsciously, that can be considered to be invisible, but really have long-lasting effects on how the firm operates, how it affects your clients, your employees, and you as the main attorney. So today's episode and today's topic, we are discussing intake, and this is accompanying with our first LinkedIn article that we released entitled The First Decision That Shapes Every Case, Rethinking Intake. And what we're discussing here just about how a lot of firms don't really put a lot of thought behind their intake systems, or they just kind of have like a generic first name, last name, and briefly describe your case workflow. And we really want to be able to talk about just pretty much the overall intake process and what that means, and how behind the scenes, or even quietly and within the invisible theme, that can have long-lasting impacts and effects on the clientele that you have, the revenue that you make, and just how your firm operates as a whole. Part of what we have a lot of statistics and a lot of percentages in the article that we released on our LinkedIn page. And one of the biggest ones from our research was that in 2025 alone, across the law firms in the U.S., over $109 billion in revenue was lost because of the intake system. And surprisingly enough, there are a lot of stats behind and a lot of psychology behind how a lot of leads look for attorneys, how they do their research on what kinds of attorneys to hire, what they look for in regards to response times and technology accessibility. There's mixed in live responses versus email responses and all things like that. We pretty much just kind of want to discuss a lot more in detail that article and our blog post on our website as well, just going a little bit more into depth about intake and really just taking this time to not necessarily be so formal, but more so go into reflection that comes with looking at intake, really validating a lot of points and kind of softly guiding to next steps and certain things that you can take as reflection points and really just decide where you want to go and how you want to operate. So the structure for today's episode is we're going to have 4 talking points, and then we're going to provide 3 gentle prompts and reflection questions at the end, and then we'll wrap up the episode. So the first talking point that we are going to be getting into is why intake is rarely questioned until something breaks. And this kind of feeds into the topic that we were previously discussing when we had mentioned that a lot of firms, or even just a lot of business owners in general, don't really pay attention to intake because it's not really seen as something that needs to be detailed. It can be really just seen as like, I just want to get clients in the door. I want to get them in as fast as possible, or give them any kind of accessibility to pretty much just get them in the door. And what a lot of people miss is that because intake is the first interaction that a lot of the leads have with your law firm, that needs to be as detailed as possible on the client side, but also on the attorney side. It saves you time with being able to allow people to filter themselves out by having a very detailed or very intentional intake process. If you operate a criminal law firm and you only handle misdemeanors, being able to have a very detailed intake questionnaire, or at least something that would give you a better foundation to decide whether or not you actually want to take these clients in or not, is something that needs to be done at the very beginning, instead of going along with the process, having all of these consultations and realizing that, yeah, you're bringing in a lot of a lot of leads and a lot of potential clients, but you're wasting more time having these consultations only to find out they're not the best matches. So you end up referring a lot more than you end up actually bringing in as your own. And so with having intake, that is a way to save yourself a lot of time, effort, and energy, but it also gives your potential clientele or just leads coming in a better foothold on deciding whether or not they actually need your particular services or if they need to find somebody else. A lot of leads, and there's a lot of statistics out there where a lot of clientele don't really know what kind of attorney they need. So their research and filling out these forms and looking for different kinds of attorneys really is on the basis of they're just trying to figure out and gain as much information from having these consultations or just, applying to have somebody give them a call back, is just gaining some information so that they can better understand where they are in the process and then what kind of attorney that they need. A couple years ago, I worked for a estate planning attorney who also, did some personal injury work as well. And he had a very, very detailed customer profile that he was looking for. And he had a lot of trigger words where if they say these things, then we can hire them or we can bring them on as a client. If they say these things, we need to refer them out. And he had been working, in the space for the last 45 years. And so he was very well aware at that point of the patterns. We had a conversation about that. And he said, it took him the first couple of years of having his own law firm to even recognize that. And he wasted so much time with these consultations before he was able to really see the patterns of a lot of the leads out there don't really know what kind of attorney that they need. And they're using these consultations as a means to gather information. So having a detailed intake process, not a lengthy, complicated one, but having a detailed one really gives you the space to not only prepare yourselves for the initial consultation, but also gives the clientele enough information to know whether or not they actually want to pursue with your law firm or if they need to find a completely different attorney. So the next point is discussing what clients feel during intake that firms never see. And part of the research that we came across really was, at least for me, it was kind of an eye-opening thing to see that there's a lot more psychology that goes on with the intake process and with researching what kind of attorney that you need from the very beginning before they even get to your firm. And I think from one of the places that we were able to get a lot more statistics from had said that 80% of, or I think it's either 80 or 82% of clients actually hire the first attorney that responds back to them. And it just goes to show how many law firms and how many people that potential clients have interacted with or just not interacted with, to the point where they just are like, whoever gets back to me first, that's just who I'm going with. So understanding what they feel during the intake process and even putting yourselves in their shoes to kind of see how vulnerable they are with whatever legal case that they may have, it can prompt you to put some kind of sense of urgency on it. It's not saying that you have to get back to everybody the second that they fill out a form and, book a consultation call and hurry up and get them in the door. But it is showing where the gap is of the fact that they are hiring the first person who gets back to them because there's such a lack in responsiveness for a lot of law firms. Every year, Clio does secret shoppers for law firms and survey them. And they have statistics from, I believe I think it's 2025 is their most recent one. But the one that I read was 2024, and it showed that they had such a low responsive rate for all of the law firms that they serve. And it was just you get to see in real time how much money they're losing out on because they're either not getting back to you at all, or they're taking a couple of days to a couple of weeks to respond back to you. And if you're somebody who has a personal injury case and you're trying to sue a grocery store or something for a slip and fall, you're not going to wait that long to hear back from an attorney. You're going to go with whoever is responding to you as fast as possible because you have a case and you've been hurt and you want some kind of justice. So really taking the time to put yourself in your targeted audience position and thinking about what would you feel if you had a case in whatever realm of law that you are responsible for, and what would you feel with interacting with whatever your intake system is now, and kind of navigating it from there, deciding how you want to reshape that and revamp that and how you want to move forward. The third talking point for this podcast is why naming the invisible is uncomfortable but necessary. So I know that awareness is something that a lot of people either don't want to make space for or they don't like what comes after it. A lot of attorneys, at least that I've interacted with, tend to avoid that because what comes with naming the invisible and being in those uncomfortable spaces next has to follow with some kind of action to do better. And a lot of people, at least in my working career, I've recognized that a lot of people are much more comfortable with putting out the fires than having to face the awareness and doing better the next time around to not have any fires at all. It also tends to trigger a lot of people because that becomes part of your identity. And if you no longer have those fires to give you that motivation or sense of urgency, a lot of people don't really know what to do and who to be from there. So it is uncomfortable. It's a very uncomfortable process because it calls for you to dig deeper and do things differently than what you've grown accustomed to doing. And growth in any measure is uncomfortable. It calls you to elevate, to move on, to move forward, to do more research and to continue to learn and grow. And a lot more people would rather just continue on where they've been at. It's very comfortable, so it makes sense. But it's necessary in the realm of law, in my personal opinion, because people need help and you will never run out of leads. Laws is pretty much the one of the areas that have been around since like the dawn of time. Justice is something that's been part of our society. It is, in my opinion, very necessary to be uncomfortable for that sense of delayed gratification. And even in today's society, a lot of people want more instant gratification, which makes sense. Everything is moving pretty quickly, but growth is part of that delayed gratification. It's something that does show up over time, and that could be very uncomfortable because you don't know if you're doing it right. You don't know if you're even on the correct path. But being able to face the things that are not aligned with you anymore and make those necessary changes, not just yourself, but those who are coming in contact with your firm, whether they're working for you or they're your clientele, it makes it more necessary along the way. So the last talking point is how operational clarity protects both the attorneys and the clients. So we kind of touched on this a little earlier with talking about how being intentional with your intake process really protects the time and energy for the attorneys. And then for the clients, it gives them a lot more information to stand on to even see if you are the proper attorney they need to be looking for help with anyway. Having this or taking this a little further, it really protects both on the same playing field because when it comes to your interactions, having a intentional intake system puts both parties on the same page. So you're starting off on the same page, everything is clear, the clients know what's happening, the attorneys have a good idea of what they need to do and how they need to do it, and both parties kind of enter in that mutual agreement and continue down the process later on. One of the statistics that also came up within the article was that a lot of clientele are not really concerned about the price if they have that operational clarity up front. If they know what's going to happen, if they know what's expected, and they know that you're there to protect them, lead them, and guide them, a lot more people are not concerned about how much it's going to cost for them to have you work on their cases. There's been a lot of attorneys that I've worked for who have sent out their invoicing and billing only to have such harsh feedback from their clientele of just, I didn't know you were doing all of this. I didn't know you were working all of this. I can't believe you charged me this much or whatever. And it's because of that those gaps in communication. And that's something that they weren't aware of up front, even able to discuss that during their intake process of this is how we do our invoicing and billing. This is how we communicate with you. We have certain checks and balances in place to keep you aware of the entire process so that you're not surprised later on. One of the things that came up was the fact that most people are concerned about how paying for it makes them feel afterwards. And the biggest emotion that affects that is regret. Are they going to regret paying you all this money if they don't feel like you protected them or they don't feel like you communicated with them, despite the fact that you could have solved their case and moved on and called it a day? But if they don't feel like you actually saw them as a person or took the time to be intentional with keeping them updated and communicating with them and answering their emails and their phone calls within, a realm of whatever boundaries you have in place, they still will walk away with regret at the fact that, yeah, their case was resolved, but they don't feel like a valued customer or client with your law firm. So Having that operational clarity protects both you and your clientele by making sure you're aligned, you're on the same page, and you both have the same end goal in mind with with clear steps of how to get there. So we want to conclude this podcast episode with giving you some questions to think about, and we'll include them in the show notes as well, and just giving you a space to start thinking about how to be more intentional with your intake process and how that can make your firm and your employees and your clients feel much better about the overall interaction. So the first question is, if your intake system disappeared tomorrow, what in your firm would actually fall apart? Where does your firm rely on effort instead of structure? And what would change if your intake worked the same way every single time? So that's it for today's episode. If this conversation resonated with you, you can explore this concept further in the accompanying article on our LinkedIn page titled The First Decision That Shapes Every Case, Rethinking Intake. Or you can watch our YouTube discussion where we approach the same idea from a more structured visual lens. But here on this podcast, the hidden file exists to slow things down, to reflect, contextualize, and give language to what many firms feel but haven't been taught to name. We hope today's insights help you move forward with greater clarity and less internal strain. Law firms aren't built in moments of urgency. They're built through consistent, intentional choices. This is Legacy Contracts, and until next time, keep leading with clarity.